Alrighty, go ahead, get started.
Taylor, sorry, no, I'm gonna start by asking the Gov and Op team respectively to state their name, position, and what house they're in. So we'll start over there with Gov.
Brent Buderbach, Prime Minister.
Justin Fink, member of government. Warren Lewis.
I'm Reagan for QE1 and I will be your leader of opposition.
Betsy for QE1, and I'm the member of opposition.
All right, and I want to introduce our judges. We have Dr. Bradley, Kylie Willis, and Dr. Tubbs. So thank you guys for being here. A reminder, if you're online, make sure you keep your cameras and your microphones off, so we're not distracting. And I also want to remind the debaters that I will tap when your protected time is up, and I will tap again when it starts again after, when there's 1 minute left. I will give you a 30-second signal and a time signal, and if you keep going, I will cut you off. Just to let you know, and I will read the motion for this debate, which is: this House believes that canceling via social media is a valid means of extrajudicial punishment to hold the powerful accountable and get some form of institutional justice. I now welcome the Prime Minister to begin their constructive not to exceed 7 minutes.
Alrighty. All set? On the government side, we're going to explain to you why we think that canceling by social media is a valid means of extrajudicial punishment, as the motion says, to hold powerful people accountable and to get some form of institutional justice. Now, before we get into our constructive, I want to define a couple of terms, because there's a lot of potential with this sort of motion, especially given the wording. There could be a lot of confusion, and it can get really messy if we don't really be very specific about what type of actions we're talking about. So first, let's talk about canceling. We're going to say that canceling is an attempt to petition for the removal of a person from a position or role. We think that valid means that it is justified and a reasonable means of effecting change. We think that extrajudicial means that it is outside the legal process, often for speech that is reprehensible but constitutionally protected. We think that institutional justice is an attempt to convince the organization to uphold the values that they claim to espouse. So we think this is really important because it means that the canceling has come from people who have a vested interest in the success of the organization. It's not just random people on social media who want to tear down an institution because they hate that institution. They're looking for any excuse to tear it down. I think it's important that it sort of comes from people who are, at least in some sense, affiliated with or care about the success of the organization. Otherwise, we think that loses a lot of legitimacy in terms of the action itself. We also think it's important to talk about what it means to be a powerful person. We take this to mean people who hold public influence or a specific role of power. So the importance and the reason for this is that we're not talking about canceling high school students for things that they posted online. We're not talking about just people cherry picking random tweets from 10, 15 years ago of people who are not in any position of real authority. The idea here is that we're holding powerful people accountable for institutional justice. So with that in mind, any questions on the definitions? Right.
Yeah, so are you saying we're having this debate in a hypothetical reality that's not at all like our actual reality, or
Nope.
should we talk about reality?
Yes,
as
we're
well?
talking about reality. Great, thank you. We're going to my constructive. And so the constructive is that we think that, one, this is a valid form of institutional justice because there are many scenarios of this nature. We take this to, there are instances that will come up where people will engage in reprehensible speech or actions that is constitutionally protected but otherwise objectionable. We think that the examples of this are Hollywood figures, Christian public figures, politicians, corporate executives who may say things or may do things that are legal but also wrong. And we think that we need to really examine sort of the perverse incentives that allow for corporations or incentivize corporations or institutions to kind of hold on to people who are filling these positions, even if they're aware of wrongdoing. So Justin's going to kind of expand a little bit more on the incentive structure that exists for institutions to not affect change, and that's part of why it's important that the public be able to hold them accountable. But so we think that the first point there is that it's valid because there are many scenarios like this that are constitutionally protected but are otherwise objectionable. Second, and this is important, is that this does not preclude proceeding methods of private accountability. And so we think that especially from a Christian perspective, it's important that accountability be done in a loving way. It's important, and it's really, when we acknowledge it's really difficult to achieve this through social media, not impossible, it's difficult. And so we think it's important that private action should be pursued as a first as a first course of action. We think that it's important to be able to go back to to be able to use social media, to be able to use sort of public means of accountability in case that doesn't work, in case it doesn't work. And again, like Justin can expand a little bit on the perverse incentives there, but we think that it's really important to examine and to acknowledge the place that public accountability does have in these sorts of questions. So we think that's really important to be clear about who we're talking about. I think that there have been some big names in the Christian world recently of people who were engaging in terrible actions and were not being held accountable. Ravi Zacharias is one of the biggest ones that's come about recently. I think you can look at examples of politicians like Matt Gaetz. You can look at Hollywood figures like Harvey Weinstein, corporate executives who misuse their positions of power for personal gain. And we think that it's important to acknowledge the role the public sphere plays, especially in our modern world, of being able to hold people accountable in this sort of way. So we think that it's important to realize the place of social media, the unique ability that it has to gather widespread attention towards a certain issue, the place that it holds in holding institutions accountable. And we think that the reason that this is important is that, the reason that it's valid, the reason that it's good, because the opposition can be going to tell you all the horrors of cancel culture and how it's ruined people's lives for things that they have since changed their thinking on. We see it as an ability and a means by which we can hold people accountable for things that they're doing currently or have done that affect the position that they hold today. So that's why we think it's important to apply this to people who are in powerful positions. This is why we're seeking this as a means of institutional justice. This is why we think that it's valid for the public to hold people accountable. We think that it's important. We also want to I also want to kind of revisit a little bit the importance of this coming from someone who is or not necessarily within an organization, but we think that it's important for people to have a vested interest in the success of the organization. What I mean by this is that it does not make sense for people who are not Christians to try and cancel people who are in positions of Christian organizations for actions that many Christians would hold to be completely within the orthodox sphere of Christianity. And so, for example, when Christian organizations say that they uphold when they uphold the idea that people should not get divorced and accept in extremely limited circumstances, we think that it's important for any attempt to hold someone in the church accountable for that, or like a Christian public figure. We think that it's important for people for that sort of canceling, so to speak, to come from people who also subscribe to that sort of beliefs. Not to say that it can't come from other places, but we really see that as the primary means of this motion. And so what it wouldn't make sense for someone who's not involved in the Christian community, who doesn't subscribe to Christian beliefs, to then suddenly find, oh, aha, I found this example of this person not doing what they said. And so therefore we're going to cancel them because we don't like them. And so we think it's important that we're protecting the integrity of our institutions in this manner. So we are very proud to propose.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your constructive, and I now welcome the Leader of Opposition to begin their constructive, not to exceed 8 minutes.
Get my timer up. I'm sorry, can you repeat how much time I have?
8.
I think I know this by now, right? Okay. All right, so if everyone is ready, I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. While we appreciate the government's apparent attempt to make this a fair debate with the definitions that they gave for their model, we also think that debates should take place in reality as much as possible. And so their definitions, while attempting clarity, actually narrow this debate to the point where we can't talk about the actual effects of the actions that we take, whether they're intended or unintended. We think that especially when we're talking about justice, we should be concerned with whether or not the actions that we take have negative effects on those outside of what they say is the context of this debate. For example, the average person who's not powerful, people who are not part of the institutions that he's talking about, and the other people who may be affected by this conversation. We think that it's incredibly important to take into account these people because they matter. And when they're affected by our actions, we have to take responsibility for that. So with that in mind, we think that it's incredibly important to keep in mind the fact that when you cancel the big and powerful, when this is apparently successful, what you're sending a message is that canceling is the right way to deal with conflict in your circles. This means that it's not just going to be the powerful that are getting canceled, it's going to be the average everyday person as well, which we've already started seeing happen in the real world, on social platforms, in our local communities with people losing their jobs, and in many other situations as well. We've seen people lose all of their friends because they said one wrong thing. We've seen people actually go back to people's tweets from high school and then cancel them in the present when they're grown adults. We've seen this happen. And so while we may be talking about the powerful primarily in this round, we definitely think that talking about how the powerful affects the individual on a common level is incredibly important and well within the realm of this debate. So with that being said, I want to go into my constructive matter for this debate, which primarily revolves around two different groups of people: how canceling affects the powerful and how it affects the powerless. How canceling affects the powerful is kind of quite obvious. It doesn't really affect the powerful at all. It's largely ineffective. While we can think of a couple of very rare cases in which there seems to have been more or less some kind of positive effect from this, such as the case of Harvey Weinstein, we do also have a wealth of examples at our fingertips to show where powerful people who did something wrong, basically all they had to do was a public apology, and then they went on their merry way, kept keeping all of their wealth, their powerful positions, etc. The fact that you or I think they did something wrong and call them out on Twitter, even if we're their constituents, doesn't actually have any real effect on the fact that they have power. The powerless are not largely affected by, the powerless are largely affected by the actions of the powerful. The actions of the powerless rarely have any real actual effect on the powerful, which is why we think that extrajudicial measures don't actually really, do justice. That's why we have a justice system. In fact, we think that it's incredibly important that just measures deter future injustices, not encourage them on a wider scale amongst the common people. This is why we think that canceling on any level is actually an incredibly detrimental action to take, because it's not just the powerful who are going to be canceled, which we've seen in the real world. So we think that not only is this unjust because it promotes a precedent that establishes a realm for future injustices to be taken, we also think that this is unjust because it, generally speaking, appeals to the masses. It has influences from the power of the media and the way things are framed. It has influences from art influencers like James Charles, who kind of a pedophile, still an influencer. We think that there are lots of examples of people who have more power than they should because they were already in power when this injustice came to light, which means that the justice they can bring in this situation is naturally limited by the fact that they themselves are perpetuating their own injustices. The fact that most of these cancellations occur with a lack of information or the wrong information to begin with means that oftentimes the kind of justice that we're talking about isn't really justice on a deep level. It's just surface level appeals to the way things look to us. We often don't know the real context of things. A really awesome, obvious example is the case of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Everybody smeared Johnny Depp for being a domestic abuser. He lost jobs and he still can't get jobs. And yet now we know that Johnny Depp was actually the victim in that situation. Amber Heard was the abuser. And yet she still paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for speaking events to talk about domestic abuse based on the lies that she told in trying to defend herself from Johnny Depp's abuse that she apparently suffered. We think that this is a really obvious example. I'm sorry, I'm not taking you guys in this speech. That's way too much to talk about. We think that there are way too many examples of the negative effects of cancellation to be able to really defend it happening at any level, especially because when it does happen, it's largely ineffectual. We also think that this is contrary to the concept of reconciliation, and we think that this is the biggest point that we want to talk about on the opposition bench. Reconciliation should be the goal of any kind of action of justice. You want to take a conflict, a wrongdoing, and you want to resolve it, allowing those who were wronged to receive justice on their end, as well as allowing the wrongdoer to be justly treated and punished for what they experienced. We don't want them to endure any undue harm, any extra punishment, any disproportionate punishment for the kinds of actions that they have. For example, most cancellation calls happens on the internet. The internet is forever, guys. If you're canceled like 10 years ago, you're still canceled today. We think that that is largely going to be a disproportionate punishment for the kinds of things that people are getting canceled for. We also think that not only do you not really have the ability to make a case because there's so much misinformation and nobody really pauses to hear from Johnny Depp or anybody else who's being canceled in order to get the real story. We also think that this has absolutely no room for conversation between people, both the wronged and the wrongdoer. And we think that this generally creates a feedback loop in which the people who have already made a decision never move from their decision because they're surrounded by people who already agree with them. This happens to both the powerful and the powerless, because once we've made our minds up, we're all generally pretty stubborn about not changing them, especially when we have no incentive to, because the actual real justice system never really steps in to handle the situation. Not only is there no conversation and no room for making your own case, there's no room for growth. Once you're canceled and you're gone. We still talk about the same examples from years ago when we talk about people who made us mad, like the couple with the bakery who didn't make the cake for the gay couple. No. We still talk about them. This was years ago. Clearly this situation, this conflict in our society was never really resolved because we're still angry about it and we still talk about it all the time. We think that this largely shows that cancellation doesn't actually result in any kind of resolution, let alone a reconciliation. We think that it's also quite obvious that cancellation provides for room for even greater division, not a reconciliation between groups. A good example of this is the fact that Gina Carano was fired from Star Wars after making a tweet/Instagram post about something that somebody got mad about. She was fired from her job at Star Wars. Great. You know what happened? Ben Shapiro hired her to produce a movie for him. There was no actual resolution to the situation, and it just further divides because people who were glad she got fired were mad that she got hired by Ben Shapiro. People who were happy she got hired by Ben Shapiro were mad that she got fired from Star Wars. There was no resolution to that situation. There still is no resolution, and there can be no reconciliation between groups of people until we stop canceling people and start conversations with them. For these reasons, we are proud
now
to
turn to the member of government to offer their constructive.
All right, everyone ready? All right, I will start my timer in 3, 2, 1. All right, so before going in and kind of fleshing out some of the points that Brent had made and talked about that I've been making, I want to go into a few points of rebuttal from what we just heard from the Leader of Opposition, especially a few of the points that we heard at the end in terms of the example that she gave of the person who was fired from Star Wars and then hired by Ben Shapiro, how there was no real resolution in that example. We don't agree with this because, as we were saying with our definitions, we feel that one of the main reasons why she was canceled from Star Wars is because that the values that she was sharing don't align with what Disney is trying to share that their values are. We do believe that it's kind of aligned with the values that Ben Shapiro is trying to push. So that's why we feel that there is a resolution, because she was taken out of her role at Disney, where her values did not align with Disney, and put into a position with Ben Shapiro, where her values did align. And we think that that is one of the most important reasons that that example that they gave actually shows that this worked very, very well. Another point of rebuttal that I want to go into is the concept of, or the example that Reagan brought up of the Amber Heard case, and how she spent like hundreds of thousands of dollars doing these public speaking events, talking about her domestic abuse, and how no one believed Johnny Depp. We do agree that this is the case, that no one believed Johnny Depp, because Amber Heard put so much effort into getting the word out. Canceling and like this canceling on social media didn't really have an effect on no one believing Johnny Depp. As Reagan brought up, it was the hundreds of thousands of dollars that Amber Heard put into this lie that she was perpetuating. And now at this time that the evidence has come out that Johnny Depp was innocent, the cancel that has shifted to Amber Heard shows that this is the better way of doing things, because these people who are online have less of an incentive to lie specifically so that they can protect themselves, as Amber Heard did. Okay, what's your clarification?
Yeah, she wasn't paying to get the word out. She's getting paid thousands of dollars per event to talk about her domestic abuse experiences, even though she's the perpetrator.
Okay, well, still, that goes back to the example of the powerful perpetuating this, because she was being paid thousands of dollars by powerful organizations. You're not being paid thousands of dollars by some random middle school to come talk. So the next point that I want to go into is how Reagan was saying that this is largely ineffective. We once again don't feel that this is the case, as I've pointed out in the past two examples, because we feel that this ultimately will tell organizations what the public wants and how their views that they're trying to share as an organization align with the views of the person that's being canceled, which goes into the point that Brent was talking about, and I want to flesh out a little bit more, that sometimes these organizations have incentives or have ulterior motives to not remove someone from their position of power when they commit like one of these unjust acts of speech or actions. Some of those reasons could be like financial reasons, like it would be extremely expensive to find another corporate executive. It would be extremely expensive to find another politician to back, or to find another actor or actress. Like in the example of Star Wars, they're probably going to lose a significant amount of money because I'm sorry, I'm blanking on her name, but because she is no longer in it, fans of her won't necessarily watch the same thing and they'll end up losing money. But again, since all these corporations care about in this instance is the money, when the public is able to show that they don't agree with the alignment of the views of the actor or actress in this instance and the organization, which in this instance is Disney, that can show them that they will ultimately lose even more money if they keep them. And it will show that these ulterior motives that they have are misplaced. I would also like to point out that in Reagan's speech, she was talking a lot about how this is largely ineffective at the beginning, and then at the end talked about these like terrible impacts that this has. It can't be an either or, it's either largely ineffective or it has terrible impacts. There's really nothing in between there. So it can't be largely ineffective and be effective in perpetuating these terrible impacts. The other point that I want to go into that Brandon brought up is that this doesn't exclude initial actions. This also kind of goes into a point of rebuttal from what Reagan had said, that like people don't necessarily have all of the information, or sometimes they have the wrong information. We're not saying that the second something comes out, you should instantly go to social media to cancel a person, because especially being Christians and having this like biblical view, we think that it's important to have accountability through love and not through hate. We think that it's most important for, in a situation like this, if possible, to like talk to the person about what happened privately, see if it was a misunderstanding, or to talk to the organization, see if it can be handled in that sense. But in the instance that those don't work, which I've already showed you by talking about the ulterior motives that they usually don't work, then we think that this is the best way of going about things, because they won't get, or there will be no justice for their actions otherwise, because the organization is not willing to take action, and the legal system, whether it works or not, which is something that Reagan was debating, can't do anything, because almost all of these instances are constitutionally protected in the sense that their actions or speech were legal but morally wrong, and that's the problem. I also want to go back to one of what I feel is the key words in the motion, in the sense that this is talking about the powerful. We think that the reason that this is so important is because these powerful people hold influence in our everyday lives and people look up to them. If people are looking up to these people and seeing that they're just, like saying these things, like in the example of the Star Wars actress, she had a tweet comparing lockdowns to the Holocaust. If people are looking up to actresses and seeing them like spreading these claims and saying these things on Twitter, they want to be like people they look up to. So they'll look up and say, oh, I should also do that. And I'll real quick, do you have any POS questions?
Yeah, so shouldn't the, resolution to the justice system being ineffectual be to fix the justice system, not to go outside of it through extrajudicial measures?
Okay, so if you're saying that we should try and fix the justice system, I think that's something we've been trying to do for like hundreds of years, and I don't think we've gotten anywhere with that. So I don't think that's a reasonable claim to say that we should be doing that instead, because as it's been shown again for hundreds of years, the justice system either can't or won't handle these situations in the same way that the organizations can't or won't handle these situations. So it is proven, as I've said in this speech, that we have to go outside of the justice system to do things like this. And I want to make it very clear again that we are saying that we want it to be from people who align themselves with these organizations in the sense that they're showing the organizations that the people that they are canceling do not have views that align with the organization's views that they said they were putting out. And it's for these reasons that we are very proud to propose this motion.
Thank you, member of government, for your constructive. I now welcome member of opposition to begin their constructive not to exceed 8 minutes.
Judges ready? All right, let's begin. A lot of what's been discussed today hinges on one question. Does cancellation actually work? Well, this is an interesting question, especially given the examples that have been brought up. So I'd like to first begin with actually addressing some of the people that have been canceled. I'm going to start with Harvey Weinstein, mainly because Harvey Weinstein's cancellation was not so much a cancellation as it was part of a much broader movement that encompassed not just Harvey Weinstein's actions, but the actions of a whole host of people for several years, going back to the beginning of Hollywood, some would say, some could say. And in addition to this, Harvey Weinstein's cancellation did not result in extrajudicial justice. Harvey Weinstein actually went to court and is in prison. He's trying to appeal right now. That's a separate issue. So he can't really be counted as an example of extrajudicial justice, considering his justice came from the justice system. Now, next I'd like to talk about the Disney actress. I don't know her name. I'm so sorry.
Clarification.
Go ahead.
Yeah, recognize that the question that this round is centered around is not does cancellation work, but is it valid in the motion? And we say that it is valid.
Yes, I recognize that, but it has to do with extrajudicial justice, and that was my point. Okay, moving on. Okay, the Disney actress. The point that was just brought up in the speech preceding mine is getting in my way. I talk with my hands too much. In the speech preceding mine is that when this actress was canceled online, Disney made a change. Now, what I'd like to bring up in response to this is that we're looking for justice, not good business. Disney may have learned a lesson, but was there justice? Was there accountability? Disney maybe saved some money in the long run, but we're not talking about Disney. Disney didn't tweet. It was this actress. All right.
On this?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so there's the accountability in the sense that she made the tweet, she got canceled, she got fired from Disney. I don't see how you're not seeing that as accountability.
Socially, is she still making money?
Yeah, well, I can't.
All right. So my point is that your response to that was that Disney learned. What we're looking for is reconciliation and growth in the person that perpetrated the act. All right, moving on. I'm going to now reiterate some of my partner's points. Specifically having to do with cancellation and whether or not it works. First, it's unjust. Underneath this, you can put 2 points. First, an appeal to the masses. This is a false appeal to authority. Just because the masses all believe something doesn't mean that they're correct. using public accountability has its place. And what we have seen is that sometimes that the public will jump on a bandwagon and cancel somebody, and then we find out later that they're wrong. This is not terribly uncommon, and we know this as a fact just because of human nature. It's a well-known fact that the masses are not always right. Second point underneath this is a mob mentality. As I just mentioned, bandwagon hopping can happen so easily, particularly online, where it's very easy to just hop on the next trend and virtue signal to say, I am against this person because they did this thing, without actually looking into it. That's a harm under the current system that our team believes outweighs what the Gov team is putting forth.
On that.
No, right now. All right, second of all, it's ineffective. This is my second point under unjust. I've already discussed this to some degree. But the fact of the matter is that there are more people powerful, specifically powerful people, as the Gov team has requested me to focus on, specifically powerful people that are still in power, regardless of the fact that they have been canceled online. If we're looking for accountability, we don't have it. There are plenty of people online that still have a substantial voice and influence in our politics today, in our culture, in our entertainment industry, that have been canceled but continue to influence what we see in the news and around us. Moving on, this is another point. Disproportionate. This has to do with, I'm gonna go back to our example of Johnny Depp. We're sticking with Johnny Depp because he is a powerful figure, but justice was disproportionate. It was Johnny Depp against the world, and Johnny Depp lost. And meanwhile, Amber Heard, as we've discussed, goes on with little to no consequences. This is disproportionate not only for the little guy, the high schooler who tweeted something stupid, but also for Johnny Depp. Unfortunately, I'm not very savvy with these sorts of things, so I can't think of another example off the top of my head, but we're gonna move on. Third, most importantly, I'm gonna discuss reconciliation. One of my favorite shows that I watched as a child was the cult classic Firefly. Firefly is notable because it only had one season, and then it was canceled. Cancel means end. Once something is canceled, the discussion stops. Without discussion, without discourse, we eliminate the opportunity to grow or to learn. So if there is somebody that said something stupid and needs to learn, they can't do that if the public has made up their mind.
On that.
Sure.
Yeah, so you're taking one word and applying it into two different instances and claiming that it has the same definition. That doesn't necessarily make sense, because if you're saying that a person is running and a car is running, being word for word the same definition, that doesn't apply.
To be honest with you, I don't exactly see how I'm doing that, so I'm just gonna keep moving, but maybe more. All right. Underneath this is key. With cancellation, there's no opportunity to take responsibility. Once somebody has been canceled, they have no voice. This means that should they grow or learn, what do? Where do they go from there? Without an ability to have a voice, they've been stripped of this, they can't actually take responsibility. This has a social impact, and as much as people just see them go away, and we never hear, there's no hope of resolution. Without this responsibility, it's very hard to imagine that we could have reconciliation. It stops halfway through. The process halts. Without being able to continue forward with admitting to the wrongdoing, apologizing, and reconciling, making up with those that were wronged, resolution and reconciliation are impossible. For this reason, I am proud to support the opposition side. I don't know the exact words I'm supposed to say. Thank you.
Thank you, member of opposition, for your very constructive, and I now welcome the Leader of Opposition to return to the floor and offer their rebuttal, not to exceed 6 minutes, and wherein they may offer no new constructive arguments.
All right, if everybody is ready, I will start in 3, 2, 1. All right, little known fact, actually no, it's a really big known fact. Executions used to be public. That was the thing. Everybody would come from like miles and miles and miles around to come and watch somebody die. It was like a thing. People would like bring blankets and picnic and watch, and it would be really entertaining, apparently. They're not public anymore. Why are they not public anymore? Because we realized that there's something wrong with people coming to watch somebody die. We realized that there's something wrong with turning somebody's death into an entertainment form. We realized that justice, if it's going to be real justice, should not be for anybody's entertainment. It should be private, it should be genuine, and it should actually achieve the results that it's trying to achieve. Cancellation occurs publicly. It is everywhere. Everybody sees it. And we're not reading the tweets and the news blogs and all of that stuff because we care a lot about justice. We're coming to watch the sharks feed. And we are the sharks a lot of the time. We're coming because all we really care about is the show, the entertainment. We're turning somebody else's, what's supposed to be their justice, their punishment, into our entertainment, and we are enjoying every second of it. And I think that's really, 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 really wrong. I think it's corrupt. And I think it's a sign that our society as a whole is starting to turn justice into our own entertainment once again. We think that we have made abundantly clear in our speeches today that it doesn't just stop with the powerful. When you do something with the powerful, you're setting a trend. When the powerful wear a cool new jacket, everybody wants the jacket. When the powerful make lots of money, everybody's like, oh, money is the sign of success. I'm going to do that. No. When the powerful get canceled, what you're showing is that is how things are done. You are starting a trend, and trends cannot be controlled. They spread. That's their nature. You cannot build an entire case around what you would like to happen ideally, something about cancellation in love or something, as if that's actually anywhere near close to the definition of what love is. When you're stopping the conversation, when you're cutting someone out of your life and saying, no, you don't get to speak anymore. I'm tired of it. I'm not going to hear it. You are canceled. In a way, you're dead to me. I think that that is absolutely ridiculous, and I think that is nothing at all like the real definition of love. I think it's very important as we go forward today to remember the fact that you can't actually control trends. You can't actually control the public. And when Disney cancels one person because they're powerful, you can't actually stop it there. You can't tell people Twitter is only used to cancel the powerful because, guys, that's not how the real world works. What we're seeing today, what we've seen in our lives over the past like a million years practically, is that everything becomes common eventually. And that includes cancellation. That includes the methods that we use to have justice in our society. And we think that this is not justice. Earlier, Justin said that I was contradicting myself by saying that it's not that it's ineffectual and yet it has devastating effects. No, I was not contradicting myself. It is ineffectual in achieving the justice that we are trying to see. At the same time, it is very effectual at causing massive harms to massive amounts of people and to the very nature of our society and the morals and the values that we uphold. It can be both at the same time. Things can be ineffectual in what we want them to be and very effectual at the exact opposite of what we are trying to achieve. And that is what cancellation is. No, but I will talk about you again. Another thing that you mentioned is the case with Gina Carano, and that what Disney cares about is money. You're right. When corporations are canceling people because somebody on Twitter is like, hey, they did something wrong, you should cancel them, they care about money, not justice. They're not concerned about whether or not it's actually right or wrong. They're concerned about making sure that as many people as possible are their customers, are their paying customers, and that still like them because at the end of the day, they're building a brand. Justice is not about brands. It's not about appearances. It's not about what you and I think individually looks right. It's about what is actually right. Not just in this moment, but eternally. Not just in this moment, but tomorrow and the next day and every day after that. Because as we've already said, the internet is forever. And when you get punished today, you get punished for your life if it's on the internet. We think that generally speaking, it's very true that the judicial system is very difficult to fix. However, something being hard doesn't mean that we should stop and give up and try something else. Batman saw that the judicial system in Gotham City sucked, and he was right. And so he put on a bat costume and he went out there and he started kicking people in the face and throwing them in prison cells. And that didn't really work out very well for him because they just kept coming.
Last chance for
The
people to go on.
system of Gotham City never changed. It never got better. Batman is never going to be able to retire. Okay? There's just always going to be another Batman because there's never actually going to be a fix. Cancellation isn't a resolution. It does not provide for reconciliation, for growth, for change in our society. It's a cancellation. It's an end. It stops the whole thing, and it never actually does what they're saying is our goal. You know what? We have the same goal. We want to change the world. We want to make it a better place. We want it to be a place where justice is served, where change is made, and where we can reconcile after our conflicts. We just don't think that cancellation is the right way to do it. And we think that anybody who's been, aware of the world around them for the last couple of years can see the fact that that is very, very true. The world is not a united place. I'm pretty sure that since cancellation has arisen as a common thing in the world, none of us are actually of the opinion that the world is a more united place, that we have a stronger community, that we are more likely to have conversations with one another, that we actually care about relating to each other. We are more divided than ever, and we are more angry than ever. And cancellation is part of that problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader of Opposition, for your rebuttal. I now welcome the Prime Minister to close the round with their rebuttal that may not exceed 7 minutes and wherein they may offer no new constructive arguments.
7 or 6? 7.
7.
All right, so I'd like to begin my speech by reframing and pointing back to the motion and the weighing of this round. I think that what's really, really important, though, I think that the offense has kind of lost their way, is that they are focusing in on the effectiveness of cancellation. They're focusing in on the externality of cancellation. They're focusing in on the reconciliation, which I think those are all valid and important concerns. The problem is that the focus of the motion is the validity of cancellation as a means of achieving institutional justice. And so we think that what you get cleared out of this round is you get from the government bench a sense of a clear purpose to cancellation, a reason for why we are seeking it, and a reason for why using social media to hold people accountable is important and also valid. So I think what the op bench has to prove in order to be able to win this round is they have to be able to show that they're going to have to explain why and how public shaming is never acceptable, or at least is never acceptable, even after exhausting private actions. And Betsy kind of hints at the idea that okay, maybe there is time and place, but we never get that out of the opposite bench. They talk a lot about the importance of private accountability. We agree. I said that in my first speech. The problem is that they have not demonstrated what should happen when the private actions fail, and that's where you get a model out of the government bench. All right, so we think the principal clash in this round lies in the validity of social media cancellation. We don't think that the opposition bench deals with this really, because they talk about reconciliation, they talk about how this can affect people poorly. We agree that those things all need to be thought through. The problem is that they're not really engaging with the validity of cancellation, which is the most important concern in this round. Okay, so explain why and how this debate unfolded as it did. Okay, so I laid down our first two constructive points. The first explaining why this is valid, and explaining why, and this is that kind of got misconstrued by the opposing team. A lot of the scenarios that we're talking about are things that are constitutionally protected speech. You can say, I hate Christians, I dislike Christians, I dislike Ohioans, people from Ohio. You can say that, that's constitutionally protected, thank you, Tia. And so I think this is an important thing. However, those might not be good things people are saying. You shouldn't say, like if you're the head of the Midwestern Agricultural Union, whatever that is, you shouldn't probably say that I hate Ohioans, because Ohioans are people that you represent. It's not illegal for you to say that, but that's not a good thing to be doing. So there should be some accountability. So I think that's what you get out of our side. So a mechanism for this. The second point that we gave is this doesn't preclude proceeding methods of private accountability. This really kind of beats a lot of the case that you get on the opposing bench because they talk about private accountability. We agree. We think that private accountability should come first, but we're also saying that there's a valid and good place for public accountability. Okay, we think that what we hear out of Betsy's speech, we talk about the mob mentality, talk about what she gives the comparison of like a TV show being canceled, just like it ended, and a person being canceled. We don't think that's really important, as Justin pointed out. It's kind of comparing apples to oranges. The idea is that we're looking to hold people accountable in an institutional form. The goal of this round is to talk about the institutional integrity of people holding the values that they claim to present. And that's what I talked about in my first speech, about how we're trying to hold institutions accountable to values that they say that they hold. That's why we think that the accountability should come ideally from people within the organization or people who care about it. And so the idea that when we get out of this Reagan's last speech, the idea that we are making cancellation a form of entertainment. Look, I recognize that's a legitimate concern. I can see that's happening. But what we're not saying on SideGov is that we're all in favor of making that entertainment. We think it's valid. We need to be concerned about how we use it, but it's definitely valid in the way that it's applied. We're not over here advocating for the hashtag Michael Long is over party because we don't think that is the right way of approaching cancellation. We think that, again, we're going to look to private means of accountability first, but we think that there's a time and a place for public means of accountability. And nothing on the op bench really gives us an alternative framework for how we should approach these sorts of situations. Okay. Justin talks about the perverse incentives, the financial incentives for not replacing someone, the financial incentives to not replace someone, and that just so why corporations might ignore wrongdoing even if they're aware of it. Also the embarrassment factor. So we think that's really important to take into account. And understanding why corporations might overlook private concerns and why they might be open to understanding and recognizing and acting upon public concerns. So that we think that was a really important part of our case. Reagan talks a lot about the justice system, and how the justice system should be fixed. Great, we agree. Also recognize that the justice system doesn't apply to a lot of matters pertaining to speech, a lot like constitutionally protected speech. And we don't think that cancellation necessarily should be approached by the justice system in a lot of these situations. So the idea that the justice system just needs to be fixed and that would solve all these problems, one, not obtainable, and not two, not sure that we want it. So the idea that, so we don't think the justice system is supposed to be involved in a lot of these sorts of scenarios. Reagan also talks about how it's contrary to reconciliation. We agree with the competition has to happen first. So on side government, we provide a framework for understanding what cancellation looks like in a modern context, understanding the sorts of institutions that this is applied to, the sorts of people that this would apply to. I think it's really important that when you approach these sorts of scenarios, ideally, first, you go with the private method, but also recognize there's an option and there's a role in our society for public social media accountability in order to achieve institutional justice. Thank you, Project Professor.
Thank
Oh,
you,
you're right.
Prime.
I did think it was 6 months. Whoops.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for your rebuttal, and thank you to all the debaters for this excellent debate. Thank you also to the judges for your time and deliberation today. For those of you online, Raven is sending a Google form into the chat for you to get credit for this debate. For those of you in person, find someone in a green shirt or your liaison to check you in and get you credit. Judges, you can now deliberate in the founders conference room, so you have some privacy for that, and we will announce results eventually.